Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for coming along. It's going to be a lively afternoon. We're going to be looking at what's needed for the UK to transition to a low-carbon economy.
The real issue is what's going to happen through the 2020s. What policies and processes and procedures do we need to put in place today such that when we reach the 2020s, we're not in a position of having to do something drastic.
In order to succeed going forward in the energy space, we need to look for the maximum number of interfaces, and we need to work out how we can successfully manage those interfaces. We need to be much more collaborative in the way that we approach some of these exercises.
But also I'd always emphasise the social dimension, which is where academia can play a big role in trying to understand not just how consumers behave, but understand how citizens more broadly get involved in shaping this energy transition we need.
And Martin, what about the regulators' role in all of this?
And we're trying to understand the opportunities that are there for more flexible use of our energy, which has been touched on, and some of the new, less traditional business models that we see now coming up. I think actually, as well as the reductions in emissions, we have seen probably more change in the electricity sector in the last 5 years than in the previous 15. The amount of renewables in electricity, DEC published stats last week saying we're now at 25% in the second quarter of this year. 3 years ago, that was 10%.
Finance has a crucial role in allowing people to invest now so that they can access those savings going forward. And I think you then go into the political dimension. Prime Minister Cameron's been very clear. It's time to get the market working on climate change. The scale of the challenge here is so vast that we need to access the deep pools of capital that sit within our pension funds and sit within the cities.
Where do you think the greatest potential lies?
I think it's important to recognise there's no silver bullets here, so there's no single technology that's going to fix this. It's a basket of technologies.
There's always a danger that we focus a lot on the supply side and not on the demand side. We want to be able to understand both the demand side and the supply side. You clearly need to then ensure that there's a reliable supply side, but not necessarily assuming that the demand side is forever fixed in the patterns that you see today.
Some trials recently have said actually people who own their own solar panel do start changing their behaviour quite a lot, because they want to, they start thinking about how they use that energy.
How to restart the investment in renewables? What would be the wish list of the panel?
I think if you want a wish list to government, and we are obviously a policy tool for them, it's to continue with the EMR process to provide that ability to invest over the long term.
We're talking here about a truly fundamental change in a critical and all-pervasive infrastructure in any developed country, and increasingly in developed countries. And we're moving away from a model that we have at the moment, inevitably just because of the criteria that we're applying. And the ways that we have to address that at the moment do involve dramatic change.
The energy sector has always been an interesting combination of a market in some respects and a managed market, or a sector where there's a lot of policy intervention, and trying to get the balance right between those is a key challenge. But I do agree we're not going to get there unless some companies go bust along the route. We're not going to get there. While we have to try and keep options open, we can't afford to plough as much money as needs to keep all of the options open for the next 10 years. There isn't the budget around to do that. So we have to get a bit clever about how we select the options that we can take forward.
But the key is they're investable. The key is that they meet our risk criteria. And it sounds really boring, but it's actually it's a protection mechanism from what we talked about wasting capital. We are going to have to make sensible, cost-conscious decisions, that the government's clear about where they're taking their policy in this area.
The way in which we pay for and consume our energy will need to change over time. And that's certainly that's what makes it interesting, though.
Energy is an international supply chain. 90% of what we put in the UK is going to come from outside the UK. So there's also an issue about how you choose to balance your innovation development support with your deployment supports. Where do you think the real technological wealth will go? What's the market that will support it? So you quite quickly get into quite a multi-dimensional debate.
And so even if some of these technologies are relatively more expensive now, the virtue of the 2050 target and that longer term time horizon is that we do have at a high level a direction that we're traveling in, and you might need to ramp up some of these things in order to generate the supply chains ahead of when sort of a carbon price and the alternative technologies would suggest that they're purely cost effective in that very narrow sense.
What can each of us do to try and persuade politicians that above all we need an energy systems approach rather than worrying about any individual technology system or market approach?
Politics isn't just about what ministers and leaders say. Politics is on the ground in communities and in local areas when particular things get planned or announced. And I think, allowing and encouraging people to get involved in having a say about where our energy system goes, not just once every 5 years, but in general, is really important. And our research has certainly borne that out.
And I think if we look 25 years out from now, we have a finite chance that we may well have supplies of decarbonised fuel, such as hydrogen or something else, renewable DME or something of that form, that will be available to us. If we do, from a technical point of view, it's very, very difficult to beat an internal combustion engine. It's a highly refined, highly effective product that has got an ongoing market in heavy goods transport and elsewhere. So I think the question is not so much about batteries or fuel cells, it's actually about decarbonised fuel. And I think that in 25 years there is a chance that we will have a reasonable supply of decarbonised fuel. And if we will, it will really make it difficult for the alternative technologies to gain a toehold.
We're all here because the challenges we face around decarbonisation matter. And so I think actually we need to care a bit more about what we and our businesses and our investments do and connect some of the dots between some of the really complex solutions that we're going to need, for which I think this is an excellent example of some of those items, but actually some of the simple things. We're going to need to take some of those difficult decisions around travelling more or less.
I think the other thing that we need to recognise as well is that energy is not an island. Energy interacts with cities, it interacts with water, it interacts with transport. And I think there's some significant energy savings that can be made by looking at our infrastructure.
Should we advise our children to work in the energy sector? And if so, where and why?
Energy is the enabler of modern life. It's absolutely critical to the economy, it's critical to health, it's critical to human well-being. Our energy system is going to go through the most enormous change that will impact the financing, the business models, the technology, every element of it, and it's going to take decades to bring it about. Who wouldn't want to be part of that?